Simon Fagg, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tom. Thanks for inviting me.
Simon, you have a leadership consulting company called With Leadership, and I was really interested to speak with you today because you do a lot of work around values in relation to business, in relation to leadership. It's a topic, it's an area that's very close to my heart as well. So I'd love to start
Yes.
off, Simon, to learn more about your story, if you like, your story of starting with leadership. Tell us a little bit about how With Leadership came about and what really motivated you to set it up.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. So I set up with leadership 5 years ago, so 2019. And I'd been working in the leadership development space for just over 20 years at that point, I think it was. Yeah, so it's around 25, 26 years now. And I'd had my own business before, I'd been in partnership with others, I'd worked for agencies and had variable experiences of doing that. I guess my primary motive of there was bringing back my own sense of autonomy and wanting to run a business that was more on my terms and according to my principles and values rather than doing it for somebody else. So I worked for another organization, had a lot of fun there, did a lot of great work. But the bigger we got, the more divergent my philosophy was, I guess, in contrast to the owner of the business. I was a senior leader in that company, but we were just on different pages in terms of how we were going to see the culture of the organization. Ultimately, it was his business. So, I was like, okay, I'm going to go and set up my own in the sense I can determine what those values are of the business. And I'm really pleased to say it's been successful and it's nice to be able to dance to my own tune entirely. We've got a nice little team here that are all kind of sign up to those principles that I laid down when I started the company. And really the mission for the organization is to facilitate purposeful leadership. So anything we do, whether that's coaching or running training workshops, helping teams to be more functional and to understand their vision, is around helping them find purpose as an individual or as a team to help them to, for us to help facilitate that so that they feel like they're achieving what really matters.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, purposeful leadership. So that's an interesting point, and it's interesting you say about this divergence of values in the previous place that you worked prior to setting up your own business. So what are the values of With Leadership then? What did you settle on as your values, which I suppose would then be implanted in the business?
Yeah. So I'll give you the five headlines first of all, then we can dig into the deeper elements of that. So the first of those is to be one. Second is to bring light. Third is to reveal truth. The fourth is to absorb stuff. And the fifth is to leave better. Okay. So those are the taglines that we use to hang other elements on. Which of those would you like me to talk about?
Well, B1, what do you mean by B1? Because I have an assumption of, well, I already know what that means because I've done my research prior to speaking to you, but I already have some sort of grounding which would lend itself to an understanding of this. But I think this is really, really important actually. I think it's really important that we draw out what is meant by B1 and why it's so important. So let's start with that at the beginning.
I think one of the areas that I have been unsuccessful in, seen in leadership teams, and been successful in is realizing the power of unity. That doesn't mean devoiding any sense of difference. It's quite the opposite, actually. But it's finding unity in disagreement, finding unity even when you've got different personalities coming to the table. Much of the work that I do with executives, senior leadership teams, is helping with those differences, and maybe they've come to an impasse, and I'm helping them to kind of find reconciliation and then being able to function as a senior team. But yeah, so it's a big thing for me. It's like, how do we make sure that we're bringing all of the talents that we've got, all of the skills, all of the experience into this mixing pot, and working as a functional team of individuals to get the best from that. And that means really leaning into the differences that we've got, and tolerating in some elements and giving feedback on others, but really enjoying the fact that we're not all the same, but we can still be unified in where we're trying to get to and what we're trying to do for our clients, for example. So that's a big thing for me, is to ensure that we trust each other in that process. And yes, it's great fun. It's challenging.
Mm.
Do we achieve it all the time? No. Um, do we achieve it most of the time? Yes. And that's the beauty of values, I think, is that they're a North Star that help you to recorrect when you find yourself drifting from it.
Yeah, you've identified a real paradox there, haven't you, in terms of being one and having that unity, but also that individuality as well. And having the unity facilitate the individuality of the individuals as well. That seems like quite a magical sort of setup, isn't it? If you can achieve that in an organization, why would you want to be in any other sort of environment? If you can create an environment or work in an environment where you can bring yourself to work, you don't have to be shoved into
Yeah.
some cookie cutter, you don't have to be crowbarred into some abnormal shape, but instead you can bring who you are, bring your experiences, bring your perspectives, and actually contribute as a piece in the jigsaw as a unique individual in a unified purpose. That's really the dream, isn't it, for a lot of people to work in an organization like that, isn't
It
it?
is. It is, and it's not always easy for me to live to that. We'll make that point really clearly. This is like, these values are not that we're perfect at them. It's our aspiration. It's what we espouse. It's what we aspire to. It's what we're striving for. It's not always. It doesn't make it always easy, and I like the stretch that comes with that. It can be tough. I'm thinking of a leadership team that I work with, and one of the things that they realized was this importance of recognizing themselves as a senior leadership team first. I'll spare the names for confidentiality reasons, but they realized they would often introduce themselves from their functional perspective. I'm head of this department. I'm head of this department. Then they started to challenge that and say, actually, our first point of introduction should be, we are a member of this leadership team. I have responsibility for this part of UK and Ireland, or I'm responsible for this part of the European responsibilities. And I really love that mentality of kind of that identifying with the team first, and then their function almost as a secondary point. And what does that mean? That means them coming to their leadership team meetings focused on what's best for the organization rather for them as an individual. There's an element of like that being one is almost like this team first piece.
Yes.
Yeah, the paradox is the right word for it, because there's a blend. It's not
Mm.
forsaking all of your own values in that, of course, because then that's not good for the team. Yep.
Yeah.
But there's got to be some give and take in being one. I've
Yeah.
been married for over 30 years now, which is a great joy for my life. But that's part of the blend in that relationship with my lovely wife, is that there's a give and take constantly, kind of levels of judging the situation, what's appropriate, what's not, actually giving more in this particular day or moment because of what's required. And that's what makes a great, yeah, powerful relationship,
Mm.
is that willingness to think of the other person, think of the whole, not just your own individual needs, but not losing your own identity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does
That
sound it sounds complex, but there is elements, there's complexities to it, which makes it quite tricky to get right. Yeah.
well, I think the key is the purpose, isn't it? It's what is the purpose? It's what is the orientation? Because you could be even in several, you could be in all different positions as individuals, but if you're all facing in the same direction, that is the unifying factor, is that shared sense of purpose means that if you're stood over there or over there or over there, but you're all facing that way or that particular point in the distance, then you're all going to be moving in the same direction from whichever point you are on the landscape. And I think that's really interesting as well, that you mentioned about marriage, because that definitely resonates. I've not been married as long as you have, maybe but almost half that. So 14 years I've been married now, and that really does resonate. That idea of
Right.
there being some give and take, and sometimes you're the one in a position of strength, sometimes you're the one in a position of weakness, and sometimes there is that time where you need to step in, sometimes you need to step back, and it's about that adaptability as well, and keeping your eye on the bigger picture and what ultimately for the whole, for the unit, even if that unit is just two people, because two people is still a unit. It's not just a single entity, a
Yes.
single individual. That can resolve a lot of these tensions and paradoxes that exist in keeping the individual as the individual and maintaining identity while also having the unity as well. I think actually something that comes to mind in this context is from the football team I support, Leeds United, which isn't a very popular team outside of Leeds fans, I'm aware. But there is a saying that we have at the club, which is side before self every time.
Right.
And the idea of side before self, I think, is a great way of keeping your ego in check. Because we've all got an ego. We all want to be right. We all want to be validated. We all want
Yes.
to be heard and seen and everything else and acclaimed. But if that sort of stuff, if these personal, sometimes even selfish desires transcends the concern for the team and the purpose, that's when things can become problematic. Because if everybody does that, then you don't have any sort of synergy. You don't have a unit then really. You just have a disintegrated, atomized group of individuals, which they could be oriented in all sorts of different directions. So they'll be going in all sorts of different directions, and then the purpose ultimately suffers, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I see that one of the distinctions using that analogy is the difference between a group and a team is quite stark as well. And I think often we use the word team to describe a group of people that work for the same manager, and they are not necessarily a team. They're not working as a team. They might be called a team, but they're not working as a team. So one of the things that's quite interesting is that team often does have that shared sense of purpose for sure, and a shared sense of common values that they can work from. Again, not identical, but that they can agree on what those shared values are. And I'm a big one, like, so for example, when we do our strategy work for my team, it's values first. In fact, I changed the order in even in our file system so that the values document is before the strategy document in our OneDrive, because I want this to be a values driven organization primarily. It's not about the business strategy that's the primary interest for me setting this company. It's actually how do we operate, how do we experience the journey together is more important than the ultimate destination. I want us to travel well, not just to achieve something at the end of the year that we congratulate ourselves on, but I want us to travel every day in a way that's appropriate to the organization that we've set up. So we
Mm,
do have a destination we're aiming for, but it's also the mode of transport
yeah.
is as critical, perhaps even more so. How do we behave with each other? How do we support each other? How do we give feedback to each other? How do we interact with our clients is absolutely fundamental to the way the business operates.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really crucial point about values. I'm really glad that you've raised that because there is a very key distinction, very clear distinction between values as end states, i.e., we want to achieve something, we want to reach something, we want to become something, and values as modes of conduct, on the other hand. Values as modes of conduct is very much how we're going to do things. And I think that is really, really important because that's going to inform your quality of life on a daily basis. It's all very well if you've got this desired goal or this end state that you want to achieve or you want to reach, but if you create a train wreck in getting there, then was it really worth it? You could find that you've got a kind of Pyrrhic victory where, yes, you achieved the end, you obtained the end state, but the process of getting there was so Machiavellian or it was so chaotic that actually was this victory really worth it? Was this achievement really worth it for what it cost? Because actually we We weren't clear on other values. We weren't clear on our values as modes of conduct, of ways of doing things, perhaps ways of seeing things as well.
Absolutely. So one of the other values I mentioned was about bringing light,
Yeah,
and the kind of links into there really is so in a situation where we're coming up with ideas, or we're disagreeing, or we're trying to work out a problem of some sort. I think it's really easy, almost like as a default, to bring a darkness, a negativity, a reason why it won't work, a how dare you say it that way, and kind of it now becomes personal. And the kind of bring light philosophy is to think, what am I doing that is shedding light on this discussion rather than bringing darkness into the discussion. I'm a big one for visual visual thinking and metaphor, but there's something around that. Okay, I'm shedding light, I'm bringing a lantern into this space, and see what we see. And in fact, actually, I don't know what the answer is at times, but I'm holding a light up. Oh, look in the corner over there, there's a bit of information we haven't even looked at yet, because there's
yeah,
light shed on it rather than darkness, into the rooms. And this idea of having light and bringing light to a situation is that as humans, I think we're naturally drawn towards the light. When you're in the darkness, you walk towards a torch, or to a beacon, or to a lamppost. You're kind of walking in the light. So this idea of being someone that people want to follow when you're carrying light. We can we work in some organizations. Large organizations often have, quite a lot of political layers associated with them, and I think it'd be quite refreshing when we go in and don't get drawn into that. We kind of try and bring light into that situation rather than get drawn into the politics of a situation. Can make a big difference to the outcomes of meetings and the efficiency and speed at which they work, as well. So it's something we enjoy, is aiming, again, striving for that. Don't achieve it every time, but striving to bring light into a dialogue, into relationships with our clients and with each other.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really important. There's a couple of things that jump out to me in this part of the discussion, Simon. One of them is a saying, and I don't know who originally coined the phrase. Maybe it was Dostoevsky or somebody of that nature, talking about truth. The idea that all progress starts with telling the truth. Again, I can't remember exactly who originally said it, but it really strikes me as a powerful and very valuable phrase, because if we can't, I think bringing light, and I know that bringing truth is part of your values as well, but I think that
Yeah,
the light aspect is very strongly related with the truth aspect, because like you say, things could be going on in a particular corner and no light's been shed on it, so it's festered, it's degenerated, it's gotten worse, and actually bringing light, to me as I see it, like you say, it's about keeping things positive, not throwing shade on anyone or bringing darkness or negativity. But it's about establishing the facts, isn't it? It's about establishing
yeah,
what are the actual facts of the situation, not about let's take the emotion out of it, let's take the opinions out of it, but what are the actual facts that are going on here? And and I suppose from your point of view, it's being careful that you're not being made the referee between people's in-house squabbles, so that when you come in as an external consultant, people don't say, here's someone who can validate my position, and they're going to tell my
yeah,
opponent or my adversary in the political landscape why they're wrong, and I'm going to make my case to them, and I'm going to put my case forward. It's not about that, is it? So it's, I suppose for you, it's quite important to extricate yourself or not even get in that situation in the first place, so that you don't get made up as a referee in a Punch and Judy show.
yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm hired to facilitate or to mediate between two parties. That's sometimes why I'm being asked to come in, is
Yeah.
to help with that. But both parties know that that's the case, so if
Hmm.
that's the scenario. And that can be really rewarding, actually, when you've met with them individually
Yeah.
and they are definitely not wanting to engage with the other party. That's why it's been outsourced to an external party, because they haven't been able to sort it themselves or with internal resource. And then to find a space where you can help them be civil and find common ground is really powerful. And actually, it does tie into the revealed truth value. So the underneath that one for me is things like listening deeply. So part of the skill of revealing truth not is talking less and saying more. It's actually listening deeply, which is at the heart of that. And because if you listen deeply, you start to hear not just what's being said, but what's not being said. You pick up themes and trends, feelings, emotions start to be listened to and expressed. And there's great power there because you're picking up on the nuance that can be easily skirted over in a business meeting. The cliche elephant in the room is not being spoken about. And revealing truth is actually, let's talk about what's actually going on rather
Yeah.
than pretending that it's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, hard thing to do, but it massively pays off
Mm.
because we're talking about truth. We're talking about what's really happening.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's yeah. There's an honesty in the conversation, even if people are disagreeing with each other. There's an honesty which is really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's that saying, isn't there? It's about hearing the song beneath the words. So it's not just
Yeah,
hearing the words that people say in a literal sense, but it's understanding what's underpinning that. What are the emotions that are underpinning that? What are people saying without saying, so to speak? It's interesting
yeah,
about listening because listening's one of those things that is massively overlooked in relation to communication. In all the communication focus that we have in organizations, a lot of it is about how do I craft an email? How do I become a better public speaker? But so little of it seems, proportionately, so little of it seems to be about listening. And one of the things that has really struck me as a member of Toastmasters, going to Toastmasters meetings is primarily about public speaking. It's about crafting a speech, giving a speech, getting better at delivering speeches. But one of the things that I really value from that experience is listening to other people. It's actually doing the evaluation for somebody else, evaluating somebody else's speech, because you have to listen
yes,
very, very closely, much closer than you otherwise would do. If you're just a regular member of the audience, you can just kind of sit there, put your feet back, and just listen to what they've got to say at face value. But if you're doing an evaluation, the intensity with which you've got to listen is higher than just a regular audience member. And I found that's massively helped me to listen. It's made me realize actually how much I'm not listening in many cases. It's very easy
yeah,
to we skim read, but we also skim listen, don't we? Where
yeah, definitely.
we hear these words and we're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, he's on about this, he's on about that, he's on about right, got it. But we've not really listened. We've maybe picked out a few facts because we just skimmed it, just as we would if we were skim reading something. So I think that's valuable. How can we develop that skill then, would you say, Simon, as a bit of an aside to this? Because I think that's really
Sure.
important about listening. I think this is human, isn't it? You know, we all learn how to read and write, and we learn how to speak, but do we really learn how to listen?
I know it's not taught very often. Other than maybe parents saying, "Yeah, will you pay attention? Will you listen?" It's not always done in the best light as a skill. It's more as a reprimand, often as a child. So in school as well. It's not something that's actively taught. Yeah, well, I think there's a number of elements to it. I think the first one is to actually, I think you've got to do some hard work on yourself. Um, because I think some of the noise that you're referring to that gets in the way with that skim listening that you're talking is actually often associated with our ego, and we're trying to prove something. I've got to make a point. I'm feeling insecure, so I have to speak more. I've got to make my point louder or more forcibly, those type of things. And so, when we're feeling a little bit more content with ourselves, I think we've got a great capacity to listen to other people. And so there's some of that hard work of things like what are my values as an example, and am I living towards those? And I think it's really key. The podcast conversation that I have is I often ask people, what are the three leadership lessons you wish you'd learned earlier? listening or a version of listening is the most common lesson that leaders will share with me that they wish they'd learned earlier, is listening more effectively.
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyway, so part of that is actually take a good look at yourself and who do you listen to? Who don't you listen to? Why aren't you listening? What is it about the situation? And actually, what could you learn from other people? And opening up that kind of curious mindset that someone else has got something to offer in this conversation, even if you are really knowledgeable about the thing and you're an expert. Now, there's more that people can bring to this than you may know. And so
Mm.
there's something about kind of stepping back, being a bit more humble and being willing to listen. So there's something there in the mindset. The second thing I would say is about the part of the skill as we develop this, if it's something we want to work on, is try experimenting with phrases that help play back what you've heard. This is not really deep listening, but it's a way, a journey to get there, is playing back things so that people can feel like you have demonstrated some understanding of their situation. So
Mm.
these little clauses like, "Can I just check that I've understood?" Or uh, if I'm catching this right, is it this? Those type
Yeah.
of phrases can be really helpful because one, if you know that you're going to be saying that type of thing, you are then listening with that intent
Mm.
to play back some things and check that you've understood. We've got to be careful that doesn't sound cliched or too like cardboard cutout, but it is a helpful device if we can do it naturally because
Yeah.
the other person feels listened to. So those
Yeah.
are those are a couple of things I would say. There's some hard work on ourselves, and then there's also this probably a stage one if it's an area to work on is try restating, paraphrasing, summarizing,
Mm.
and see the difference that makes to the quality of the dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's really important as well from a technical point of view. Sometimes there are technical things that we're talking about. We're trying to find a way forward, trying to find a solution. I had this situation today at work where we were talking about there was an issue with some of our partners in relation to the way that we were doing things in a certain process. And it was really important to be clear. And so I asked the question, said, if I've understood correctly, and then I restated as I heard it, as I'd received it, what the other person said. And then
Yeah,
they know how I've received it as well, because there's a very big difference between what we're thinking, what comes out of our mouths, and then what the other person receives. So I think the more that we do this sort of sense checking around what has been received from the other person, the better chance we have of avoiding any sort of miscommunication or misunderstanding, even for technical things, even not just about disagreements or different ways of doing things, but actually, are
yeah,
we all on the same page? Have we understood things here? Have we got this solid grounding in what the situation or the problem is? Because from that point, then we can start to find solutions together. So that's really important. It's really good that we brought that up, Simon, because I think it's one of those things about leadership. When people talk about leadership, I think a lot of times they're talking about flashy MBAs and they're thinking about technical skills and they're thinking about all these other things. But actually, something as simple as listening is what I would call one of the little big things. It's a little thing because it isn't flashy, it isn't glamorous. However, it's absolutely fundamental to success because failure to listen and failure to understand what's been communicated can be, in some cases, it can be catastrophic. It's not going to be catastrophic in every case, but it can be quite deleterious in certain circumstances.
yeah.
So,
Tom, one of the things that strikes me there, I agree with the sentiment of your point. The phrase something as simple as listening is part of the challenge because it's not simple. But the sentiment of what you're saying is that it's seemingly a small thing. Actually, it is a skill. And whilst it feels passive at one level, we might think, well, then I'm not actively communicating because I'm not saying anything. But of course, listening isn't just about being quiet. Listening is a two-way process, and it is a dialogue, but it is a skill. And for some people, it's not very easy. It is not very simple for them.
Mm.
And actually, the more I learn about it, I qualified as a coach and realized, wow, I thought I was good at listening. I'm not. I need to get better at it. And yeah, and it's something I'm really working on. I feel like I'm a pretty good listener. Others have told me that. But like even in the last couple of weeks, I've had a conversation with someone where I think, goodness, all of the stuff I know just went out the window because my ego got sparked, and
Mm.
I had to try and kind of prove I was right. I wanted the last word, this type of thing. It wasn't a blazing row, but it's a very simple example where I should have slowed down and just
Mm.
used the different set of skills that I've got to help that conversation be far more productive than it was.
Mm.
So I'm working on this still every day to be a
Yeah,
better
yeah,
listener.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's the point, though. It doesn't have to be a blazing row per se to impede our ability to listen, because it's the focus is different. If our because we've all got egos, and sometimes we do get a bit triggered on one point or another. But if that happens, then the focus is totally different. The focus is, it goes from what the inverse of what Covey said about listening with the intent to instead of listening with the intent to understand, we're listening with the intent to respond because we want to make a point or we want
yeah,
to score a point. Whereas if we're listening with the intent to understand, it's a whole different game. It's kind of like when you're learning a foreign language and you're doing a listening exercise and you're listening to people talking on a tape in a foreign language or a CD or whatever it is these days, and you're trying really hard to pick out, to understand, can I understand just a few words? Can I understand what the words are? And then if I understand
yeah,
what the words are, can I understand what the sentence is? And you have to listen really, really carefully. But if you're not listening to understand, you're just thinking, right, all I'm doing is I'm killing time here because I want to get back in to the ring and make my point. And so
yeah,
yeah, you're right. It is even after you've done all the work on yourself, it is something that does, I think, require constant vigilance. So just moving on then, Simon, we've talked a little bit
sure.
about the values of with leadership. So you talked about, so the third one that you mentioned is reveal truth, which we've touched on. The fourth one, absorb stuff, and then the last one, leave better, which leave better was interesting. Now absorb stuff, I'm guessing that's about learning and basically taking
Yeah,
taking things in, kind of like a continuous improvement sort of strand to things.
yeah. There's also just a quick one on that. Is also about being an energy buffer. There's some, so
Mm,
the absorption is about learning stuff, but
yeah.
much of the work that I do is going into an environment where, let's say, I'm at the front of the room facilitating a session, and there's 20 people in the room. Five of them come in with a load of baggage,
Mm,
don't want to be here, or why are we doing this anyway,
yeah.
or don't agree that this is the right approach. So part of that is geared towards being a buffer to that and helping us get through it so that for the benefit of the group. So that's just as an aside. Most of it's about learning and growing, but
Yeah.
there's also about this, how do you take somebody's negative energy and turn that into something that could be useful in the
Yes.
moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then leave better is the last one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Leave better. It reminded me of, I think it was in Scouts, that idea of leave something better than you found it, or leave a
Yes.
place better than you found it, or something to that effect. And I really like that. I like that idea. I think that's something that I've aspired to often, is when I've been in a situation, have I left it better than I arrived? And I think if that is an aspiration, then the world will be a much better place if we were all able to contribute in that particular
Yeah.
way. So they're really great.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Tom. I was going to say I knew that one was linked to my parents. It wasn't. I was with my dad. It was 2 or 3 weeks ago. We were at a place and we were just talking about stuff, and I heard him say it. I heard him say, "No, it's so important that we leave better." Kind of, and it was about tidy. We were at a place. It was kind of tidying up the chairs and that type of thing. Other people had gone home, and we were, packing the chairs at the end of the event. And he's in his 80s, and but it's that kind of philosophy. It's like, okay, I didn't sit on all of those chairs, but I'm gonna leave this better than I found it.
Mm.
And from a corporate perspective, uh, it sounds a really weird thing, but I often judge a company's culture by the state of the men's toilets. So I go into lots of different toilets in organizations. Some of them are very well cleaned, but you'll see hand towels just scattered over the floor when you
Yeah.
walk into. I think, well, I'm not the first person to walk into this place or the last person to have walked out. Someone else has been in here and there's
Mm,
5 hand towels on the floor. Like, what does that say that someone hasn't picked those up?
mm,
Right. Again, try not to be too judgy, but it gives you a sense of community and a place around how clean that is, how you respectful you are of this place that arguably can be left dirty.
yeah.
Can you tidy it up? And so as long as it's not too unhygienic, I will often pick up a hand towel that's on the floor in a company toilet that I'm working in, as part of that mentality of leaving it better than I found it.
Yeah.
Um, it may sound like a trivial example, but you kind of get a sense of a place of do people leave all the coffee cups all over the meeting room table and just expect a cleaner to come in and
Yeah.
sort that out for them at 6 o'clock tonight?
Mm,
They've got a job to do for sure, but we can put them in one place on a table at the end or something like that, and if that's the arrangement,
yeah.
you don't have to leave. Yeah, it's quite old fashioned, I guess, but there's something around. Yeah, leaving stuff better than you found it. It's a very powerful principle.
Yeah. I think so. I think it's about having an outsized impact, making a bigger contribution than you absolutely have to do, isn't it? It's that idea that you're going to do more than the bare minimum in terms of serving the whole. Again,
Yeah,
I think it's about side before self in many respects, isn't it? It's about that idea that we're going to make this
again, yeah,
this nice for everybody, and then we don't have the tragedy of the commons where things that belong to everybody are taken care of by nobody, which is one of those
yes,
extreme examples where each individual can say, "Hey, it's not my responsibility to do this." But if everybody says that, then nobody's taking care of the common facilities. So, just in terms of values, then Simon, besides the values of with leadership, which values do you see as being able to make a lasting a lasting difference on a business? Which values do you see as being fundamental to a business's success over the long term?
I'm I mean the 5 that I've just suggested I hope would be a good reference, but no, more broadly, I would say that the my bias is towards integrity. So something associated with those trust, integrity, honesty, I think has the sustainability to last through multiple cycles of a business's success and challenge. Um, there are many others that we could mention, but I think that's at the core of a lot of the challenges of the absence of those things um, lead to dysfunctions in teams, within organizations, people having to politic because they don't know what's true, what's honest, whether people are being honest or not, and doing the right thing by their customers. All of that kind of ties into this space of integrity, doing what we say we're going to do, and being somebody that can be trusted with information or with a responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So I
think
think that's at the core.
yeah, I think integrity's got to be there, isn't it? Hasn't it? Because for the simple fact, and it's even on a purely logical basis, this isn't just about being some sort of do-gooder or anything like that. It's more about
Yeah.
the simple logical necessity of integrity in fostering an environment of trust. Because if there's no integrity, there can't be any trust. We can't trust each other if there isn't integrity. And trust is the most fundamental currency. It's more
Yeah.
fundamental than any fiat currency that we would use or any other means of exchange that we would
Yeah.
use.
And I'm on a, oh, sorry. It's a
Oh, go
long,
ahead.
I'm of an age now where I've seen I'm in my, well, I'm 53. Yeah, so then I've been through various cycles, been through various organizations, and seen crashes and downturns and all that kind of stuff. And I've seen people make decisions in crisis that lacked integrity because of the circumstances. They chucked out the value that they would hold dear otherwise, and it achieved an immediate gain.
Mm.
They won the battle. Oh, sorry, I don't like using that analogy actually, but they achieved a short-term gain,
Yeah.
but they lost a longer-term relationship as a consequence of action, or
Mm.
those actions. So I think that trade-off there is I can understand it in the immediacy and the urgency and all those decisions, but you zoom out, you realize, hold on a minute, this relationship is something that was really valuable to me for the next 40
Mm.
years, 50 years, 20 years, whatever, not just in this week or this day.
Yeah.
The other benefit, Stephen M. Covey wrote the Speed of Trust book, and I've seen that play out time and time again, whether it's in our own business or with others. Just when you get those trusting relationships, meetings are quicker, they're easier. They are, yeah, this decisions are made so much more simply, less lawyers involved, and being able to get to the heart of an issue, make a decision, move on, and it makes a massive difference to the efficiency and consequently the profitability of an organization to operate in that way,
Yeah.
rather than gamesmanship and meetings on top of meetings on top of meetings to try and
Mm.
navigate how we're going to make a very simple decision.
Yeah.
So the speed of trust is massive as well.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I have got that book. I've read it, and it's interesting how, from recollection, Covey makes the point that when trust is high, speed increases and cost decreases. Like you say, you need less
Yeah.
lawyers, you need less checks and balances around all these different points and particulars. And those things are all expensive. Time is money in every respect. A lot of these professionals have billable hours that they charge to. So yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. Therefore, on a purely logical basis, integrity is a no-brainer. So let's talk then about some of the antithetical values to long-term success then. So which are the things that stand in the way? Because it's all very well, because we can all talk about these things, and any organization would say that we're a good organization. It's really easy for even people who've done things that are heinously wrong can be quite adept at justifying themselves as being a good person. I'm a good person, and they'll adduce this single piece of evidence that says, oh, well, I've got this, or I've done that, or I'm a good person because of X, Y, or Z. But in actual fact, their ways of doing things are undermining the whole, if you want to call it that, the organization, and also the self. So, what are some of those things that you've come across so far, Simon? Some of the things that really undermine lasting success in business?
It's almost the opposite of the integrity piece, but bear with me as I explain this. I think the difference between what a company espouses and what they actually do, what a leader or a team, so it is the integrity piece, but it's the flip side of it. So if I'm pronouncing these amazing things and then I'm living, the delta between those two things is huge. Now that, let's say hypocrisy, that gap erodes so much within an organization. We don't trust leadership anymore. We just see these things as a marketing exercise. We've got the writing on the wall that says all these nice words. It's on the website. It's in the company brochure, but it means nothing because it's not lived on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's something there in terms of, it's okay if you've got a value that's focused on maximizing profit or operational efficiency. Companies have been extremely successful with that thing, but then don't keep talking about our people are our most important asset if you don't believe that, not operating like that's actually true.
Mm.
Because it just, when the moment when that comes into question, it's just like, hold on a minute, this is completely at odds with what you've been preaching. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
So there's, so for example, I fly with Ryanair, and they're not promoting themselves as the world's best airline or the most comfortable or anything like that. They know who they are,
Hmm.
and that's what they're saying there. Like that they're not trying to project something into the market. They're not. In fact, it was quite in the early days. Their website was designed to be quite difficult, so you felt like you had achieved something in getting this great price of a flight. You
Mm.
know? It's not all about great customer experience. We're flying with Ryanair, and we complain about them, but then we book another cheap flight with them, to go somewhere else in Europe, the next week. But that's an example. They kind of know who they are, and they're operating to that values. Whether you agree with it or not, they've got a framework that they're
Yeah.
operating by, and arguably very successfully
Mm.
sticking with what they are. Yeah. And you could use other examples of that as well. IKEA, I think, is another one that's as an example of a different way of operating,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
true to its values as best as I can tell. I've not
Yeah.
worked in that organization, but there's something there about kind of trying our best to align how we behave with what we espouse to
Yeah.
behave, and still be as still having a space where we're not going to be perfect all the time. But
Yeah.
you know, I think there's something there that's
It,
important.
it's very interesting that you say that because that's almost exactly what Professor Brad Agel, I don't know if you know him from BYU. He's
I don't know.
based
No.
at BYU, but he's a professor there at the Marriott School of Business, and he specializes in ethics. And I had him on the podcast,
Okay.
relatively recent episode, I think, yeah, in proximity to this one. And he talked about integrity, and he talked about integrity as being people living in harmony with the values that they espouse verbally. So actually living what they say they they are going to live by, or the things that they are all about. So I think that's absolutely important. It's not just important, but it's absolutely vital in terms of building trust. Is that if I say if I'm going to present as this thing, then I better be this thing. Otherwise, trust is going to go down the pan, essentially. So that's that's interesting in terms of knowing who you are and being that, right? Taking ownership of that, like the Ryanairs of this world, because you don't promise the world they don't promise the world on a stick at all, but yet people still book with them because they do have qualities that people find value in. So that idea of congruity, that idea of clarity of communication, because it isn't just about the listening, it's also about what we put out into the world as well, and how clear
Yes.
we are in communicating that is crucial to lasting success. Now, you've mentioned politics a couple of times already. Now, when I think about politics, a word that I substitute for politics a lot of the times is power. And in organizations, to a greater or lesser extent, there is a hierarchy and power is at play. So, what would you say to a leader who does things or says things that aren't necessarily ethically or morally right? They're not illegal, but they're not morally right just because they can. How would you try and convince them that they should think twice about that? Because to them, they might look at it and think it might be just a bit of they might get a kick out of it for their ego and think, hey, I'm the man or
Yeah.
I'm the woman, right? It's not just men, but men or women in positions of power who actually get a kick out of doing stuff that they know they shouldn't really do. And actually, if someone junior said this thing, they'd probably get into a lot of trouble. But actually, I'm the boss and I've got the power, so come at me, sort of thing. What would you say to those people to dissuade them from behaving like that, from abusing power, if you like, in that particular way?
Yeah. I mean, I I wouldn't look to convince them, first of all. I think it's about helping them to come to that realization themselves. So I think this is part of my coaching training, is this opening up different perspectives. So I'd probably ask a series of questions to get them to think. Now, again, we're operating in this, it's not illegal. Okay. So if, of course, if it's going to clearly cause harm to somebody and like physically or that kind of stuff, it's a slightly different approach. But it's one of the questions I love is to get people to look 6 months ahead, 3 months ahead. And is that okay? What will you feel about it? Because you change the timeline that they're operating in and get them to think about this in a different space, a different time, a different place, and getting them to think about that then is quite a helpful way to get someone to unpeel. No, actually, I won't be very happy with that in there. But I must do this today because okay, but let's just zoom out. Well, like what does it look like from that, this person's perspective, or how will you feel about this in 3 months' time, or those type of things. If we're in the same situation as we are now, 6 months from now, is that okay? Questions like that start to help somebody unpick, start to convince themselves, hold on a minute, wonder if this is the best call to make, this judgment call. It felt right, probably because of ego or kind of this natural kind of desire to get ahead. But then hopefully those different perspectives get them to think about it differently. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
A
yeah.
man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, or whatever that phrase is. So
Yes.
it's like you're trying not to convince you, you're trying to just help to unpick the thinking
Yes.
and then to see that perhaps there's a different way of looking at this, and then coming to that realization themselves is the most powerful way that you'll achieve the change.
Yeah, I love that point that you make about changing the timeline as well and getting them to think about the implications of it in months' time because that's the key, isn't it? A lot of these things, a lot of these sort of power plays are based on ego, but they're based on that kind of short-term dopamine hit, that sense of power, that
Yeah.
sense of I am going to do it because I can, because I have made it to this position in the totem pole or whatever. But that idea of changing the time frame, I think that does provoke introspection. I love the quote that you shared as well. I think it was Galileo who said, I'm pretty sure it was Galileo, it was one of the Renaissance Italians who said something to the effect of, we can't, you can't, you basically can only, you can't teach anyone anything. You can only help them to, or you can't convince anyone of anything. You can only help them to discover it within themselves. And that's
Right.
that's what it is, right? So it's about provoking that sort, like you say, with a series of questions. It's about provoking that introspection within the person so that they think again about it. They think from a different perspective than they had done before because it was a singular dimension that they were looking at it from previously. But actually, if you look at it from this
Yes.
perspective, you've actually got more information to go on in deciding whether or not it's a good course of action. So I think that's crucial.
And that broader point around the leader of a team and the power dynamic there as well is that naturally, because of hierarchy, you're absolutely right, there'll be a power dynamic even if they're a fairly humble person. If they're more senior, there's going to be a power dynamic. But if you can help them to engage the power of the team and genuinely open up the thinking of the team and perspectives, I have got enough faith in the human condition that we'll come up with ethically good decisions. If it's just driven by the person on the top and they're asking for opinions, but they're really asking for just endorsement and support, I think there is a risk that you're going to have people operate in unethical ways. You've got to watch for how we incentivize actions and behaviors. I've seen some calamitous examples of that, of where sales teams or people promoting certain products have missold as a consequence of incentive schemes. That's a slight aside, but the idea here is that you're trying to help them see the power of the team, the diversity of different thinking, broadening the perspective, so they're coming up with a better, sustainable decision that people will want to implement, not just because the boss has said so, but because we've been involved in the process of forming those plans ourselves. I don't think it's a direct point to the unethical, but I do think as you start to see power distributed through the team, then you should get and good effective use of that in meetings, etc., decision making, should get better decision making as a consequence of that.
Mm.
And then it's not just about the person who's in charge. Actually, there's been a group that's involved and they've not locked into kind of an echo chamber of just hearing their own arguments. They're really all trying to do what's best. And it comes back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, but we can get people to bring all of their good ideas and their talents and skills, you're going to get much better decisions that will be sustained in a company
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than forced through.
yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds great. Simon, just final question then. If anyone's
Sure.
listening to this and they really want to get serious about their values, whether it's on an individual basis or for a team as a team leader, how would you recommend that they do that? How would you recommend that people really get serious about their values and setting up their personal and organizational values to good effect?
The exercise that I did years ago still stands. There's two elements to it. Well, there's more than that, but there's two basic elements to it. Is that the I love the going to your own funeral exercise. So imagine, a Covey, I first come across it when I read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
The
was,
eulogy.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you begin with the end in mind. So what would you imagine that a close or a family member that you love, a trusted colleague, what would they say to you? What they say about you at your funeral. So you kind of imagine that. It sounds a bit morbid, but it's a really powerful exercise if you treat it seriously. Is what do you actually care about? What will come through that is things that you care about. The exercise I did before that, when I was 18, was what was called the I-beam story. It was a guy called Hiram Smith, um, and kind of a little bit of a strange twist, I guess, in terms of how history played out in terms of 9/11. He way before that event, he imagined this RSJ or I-beam straddled between the two towers in New York, and asking you to cross it. And he'd offer you money to cross it, and that money would go up and up, and people say no, 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 and then in again a quite dark way, but still quite powerful, kind of say, well, I've got your 2-year-old child here. If you don't come across, I'm going to drop them. And that's a very dark way of approaching this. But like, what would you cross that I-beam for? No, your life is at risk here. There's a potential that you're going to die in the process of crossing this thing. But what would you be willing to put your life on the line for? And there's going to be individuals who think about that, but there's also like, right, which of these values are things that you'd say, actually, like this is an absolute red line. I'm just not going to cross it. It's just, these are the things I care about. That exercise, both of those sound quite morbid, but they're very powerful at jarring, was provoking a thought around, well, what is it I really care about? What's really deep within me that I want to live by? I found those two exercises to be extremely helpful. So I did the first one of those when I was 18. I still have that record. I've modified it over the years. I still have that record of what I wrote down when I first did that exercise, and it's been extremely helpful in terms of governing my life and particularly in leading my family.
Yeah, it is a really powerful one. And I know of others that have used that as well and used it to very good effect because it is that, hopefully, it's the ultimate way of expanding the timeline along which you look at things. Like you say, to the executive who's abusing their power, if you have them
Yeah,
consider the implications of this decision months down the line, then it's going to be all the more powerful if you say to yourself, what about years or hopefully decades down the line, at point of death, at point of the funeral, what are people going to say about me when I'm gone? What is my legacy going to be? What am I ultimately going to leave behind as a testament of my life through the actions that I took, the contributions that I made? I think that's a really good place to finish on, Simon. So thank you so very much for your time on the Real Clear Values podcast.
My pleasure, Tom. Appreciate it. I hope that something that we've discussed is useful to your listeners.
Absolutely, I'm sure it will be.